Hello everybody, I hope everyone's doing well today. Thank you very much for taking the time to come and join the Ansible London meetup. I know it has been quite some time since we've got together either in person or virtually, so I really appreciate people taking the time to join. Hopefully we'll get these things going a bit more regularly now. Here's today's agenda. So my name is John Barker. I go as Gundalow on Matrix and most other places. So I'm part of the Ansible community team at Red Hat. So I'm just going to do a quick overview of today, and then we've got Sorin who's one of the lead developers of the ansible-lint project, who's works on DevTools as part of Ansible. And then Dennis is going to talk about migrating from Puppet to Ansible. And then finally, James will be back joining us again, talking about how to deploy OpenStack on a single machine using Ansible. Then as we'll have a bit of time, hopefully left at the end, we can have some general Q&A and discussion. And then we'll finish probably about 8:30. This has been recorded. As with everything else, the links will be put into the GitHub repository. We'll share the links for those now. Yep. So a bit of a different setup this time. We're all using nice open source software to power the back end of this. Ansible community, as you may have known, has moved to Matrix, and it's been great to see a lot of you slowly join the Ansible Europe channel over the past week or two. All of these rooms are bridged to the existing IRC channels on Ansible Libre, but being on Matrix just gives you a slightly nicer experience. Please do just keep the questions coming in the channel at any point. So for a bit of audience participation, start with, I'd like to know what you're hoping to get from today, and we'll put in a poll about if you would be interested in getting back to doing some in-person meetups. So I'll just create the poll for everyone. So just put a poll in the channel, so interested to know if people want to attend this again in person. Also, people could put in what they're using Ansible for. I do appreciate having these events online, sort of loses a bit of the interaction, but hopefully with the polls and the chat that we've got going on in Matrix channel and Ansible Europe channel, we can get back some of that. For those of you that are new to Matrix, there's lots of different channels. Put the link for that in chat for everyone. So Matrix has the context of a space, which is a sort of catalog or a room directory. So we have one called the Ansible community space, and there you can find all the main channels, such as the user channel, which is your sort of general go-to, how do I do something page, channel. And then we've got some for developers, different ones for contributors, and then quite a lot for the dedicated working groups, such as AWS, Azure, DigitalOcean, some language-specific ones for French and Spanish, networking, security, packaging, the social channel, Windows, so there's a lot of different channels in there. So do take a look at the Ansible community space. So I can see 6 votes so far. Hopefully we'll get a few more in. And if people could also just put in chat what they're hoping to get, what they're using Ansible for, and if there's anything they'd like help on, we can use those for the panel at the end. So as with the rest of Ansible, we try to be, do everything in public. So we have a GitHub repository, which I can show you now, which lists all the potential talks that people have volunteered to present. So we've got quite a lot of good stuff to come. And then if you go into the root of the repository, into presentations, you can find copies of the slides, links to the presentations and the videos, and any other notes. We'll get that populated at the end of today. So we have quite a few different places, ways that we try and help get information out, and we recognize that this is a two-way process. So we have the bullhorn, and again, I'll put links for these in chat shortly. So the bullhorn goes out every week. This is aimed mainly at contributors and developers to either Ansible Core or the collections or other related projects under the Ansible umbrella. We really like receiving different bits of news from the community. This isn't just a Red Hat thing. I think at the moment, I'd say about over 50% of the news items come from external contributors, which is brilliant. We have the community topics GitHub repo. This is something that we've been working on over the past year or so to really try and improve the asynchronous communication. We recognize that people are busy, that people in different time zones. If we have a meeting, some people might be asleep. So we're trying to get a lot more feedback and ideas, and it's really important to get feedback from you folks because you're the people that use Ansible at the end of the day. Thirdly, we've got something that's very new. This is a dedicated repository just for maintainers or collection maintainers. So it's a way of finding out as soon as some potential change might happen, maybe something in Ansible test, if you've ever been bitten by change maybe in Ansible core, about how testing works or some Python changes, then these are good things this is the way to be aware of stuff. So just putting those links in chat now. Cool. Well, there we go. That's the end of the intro stuff. So just bring up the agenda again for everyone. So we'll go over to Sorin next, who's going to be talking about ansible-lint, and then Dennis, and then James. So Sorin, over to you, my friend.
Hello. Hi. So today I'm going to present some changes that were made to ansible-lint version 6, which was released less than a month ago. Basically, the tool becomes more official in 2022 and also a little bit more opinionated. And now I lost contact with my keyboard. Okay, let's see. Play. Okay, so who I am? My name is Sorin Sbarnea. I am a software engineer, part of Ansible DevTools team, joined last year. I've been working with Red Hat for more than 5 years. And I've been a major contributor and maintainer for ansible-lint and molecule even before I joined the Ansible team. Ansible DevTools team, it's a team that maintains the development tools for Ansible for content creators. So basically, all the QA tools like ansible-lint, molecule, soon Ansible test, the Visual Studio Code extension, Ansible Navigator. So we have lots of projects. And usually project that you use when you start writing playbooks, collections, and roles. One of the things that is really hot and fresh is that now we have an ansible-lint philosophy document, and you can find a lot of more information on the documentation because we consider quite important.
Just to check, are you going to be sharing any slides at the moment?
I'm not sharing?
No, not yet.
Oh, thank you for telling me.
I wasn't sure where through the introduction we got to.
Yeah, it's perfect.
I'm seeing your email at the moment.
Yes, because this was side effect of sharing it.
Yeah, there we
Okay,
go.
hide. And now let me switch to. Okay, now you see the screen. Perfect. Thank you. Yes, my face is not very interesting, so it's much better to have something to some slides to look at. So philosophy. This is the main, let's say, sentence which that starts the philosophy document, and I would recommend everyone to read the entire document because he's trying to explain why the tool was created in the first place, why it is useful, and when and how you should use it, what to expect from it. And as you can see, the goal is to make the Ansible content, playbooks, roles, collections, to be as easy to read as possible by anyone. So to put it in another way, I think we have something mentioned in the full document saying that Ansible content is not really an art. It should not be different based on who wrote it. Now, how can you use Ansible-lint as a tool? This includes some changes since the last presentation, because now there are more ways to call Ansible-lint than before. The first one is the most common one used especially by developers, is just to use pip install or the distribution package manager like DNF. On Fedora 36, you already have Ansible-lint as an RPM package. Probably even on 35, but I'm not sure. Another way to call Ansible-lint is to use it from a pre-built container, and we maintain the creator EE execution environment, which contains the latest version of Ansible-lint. For people that are not very used to how to deal with Python dependencies and stuff like this could be a good pick. Another way to use Ansible-lint is using the Visual Studio Code Ansible extension, which is officially supported by us, or using Ansible Navigator. Both of them are using Creator EE behind, just as a note. Ansible-lint is also used every time you upload something to galaxyansible.com. It's part of validating the uploads, and soon will be included in Ansible Automation Platform AAP, our enterprise offering. So people that would have problems with the linter will be able to use official Red Hat support for it. And it is also going to be used as part of the content certification process for both enterprise and community, because it's becoming more popular and everyone wants to follow the same set of rules. What's changed in the last release that it's worth mentioning is that now we require Python 3.8 and Ansible 2.12 or newer, with an important remark here. You can and you should use the latest version of the linter, even if your playbooks and your content it's used in production with older versions of Ansible, like 2.9 or something like this. The only difference is that the linter itself needs a new version of Ansible to run, but this does not mean that the code that is linted will not work on older versions. And I'm not aware of any suggested change that would break under older versions of Ansible. As in, by older, I mean 2.9 plus, because older than 2.9, I'm not sure about. If you cannot meet these requirements easily on your platform, you can always go for a container approach where you get everything already built. One of the changes that was made in version 6 is that now we have the fully qualified collection name built-in rule active by default. It was an opt-in for a good number of months, but since Ansible itself changed all the documentation to recommend using fully qualified names for modules, like you see on the screen, instead of writing debug, you should write Ansible built-in debug. Now it is enabled by default. And not only this, but very soon in the future, we will require the same for all modules run. Now, I know that some people may say that, okay, this is a lot of text to write extra. Why do we need to do this if the short names are still working? The problem is that the short names are unsafe. So based on how you configure Ansible, you may end up running something else. Because what happens, you end up with module shadowing. One is shadowing another one. And if you want to be sure that you call the same thing, you should use the full name. And this is the reason why this rule was introduced. Another feature that was introduced in the new version was the ability to rewrite YAML files and reformat them or even fix specific errors. This is experimental, which means that you may find bugs on it, so which we will try to fix as soon as possible. The main benefit here is that instead of being just annoyed about stuff that is not really in place, now you can get them fixed automatically. And if you ever used a formatter like Black or Prettier, you probably know what I'm referring to. It's like, and you would be quite happy to not have to speak about formatting when you have a pull request. Because the pull request for making a change to a repository should be about the content of the change and the logic. The formatting can be done by the tools to keep it easy and consistent. We fully aim to use the same formatting as Prettier in order, if you use an editor that is already using it, you will not see any differences. So when you save the file, it will be already formatted and okay. One thing that we do not touch YAML block scalars, because people that use multi-line strings usually want to keep the formatting. You do not want to you have extra logic for it. And we just keep them the same way they were created. And one thing that is very important to note about reformatting is that it happens only if the file integrity can be ensured. This means that when Ansible is loading this YAML file, it has the same representation before formatting and after formatting. Anything that is done is just visual, just the correct indentation, spacing, and stuff like this. And you will see in the next slide a few examples. This feature was not implemented by the DevTools team. This came from the community, from Jacob. And I want to thank him for doing a lot of work on this. It was by far the biggest change to the linter in order to implement it. And something also important to mention is that now existing rules will be able to start auto-fixing stuff that can be fixed automatically. And one example is the built-in rule, because for built-in rule, it's very simple. You don't need a human to add the prefix, because you already know which ones are likely to be, right? You have a list of install collections, so you'll be able to guess the module name in 99.9% of the cases. So this is one example of things that can be also fixed automatically. The other ones are rules that already existed regarding formatting of YAML. If you just reformat on save, you just get rid of potential problems without any problem. I want to highlight one thing that is important. Is the second bullet is that you cannot benefit from this feature and disable the reformatting. And this is mostly for technical reasons, because you need to load the document and save it. It's like we do not do find and replace in a text file. We load the file and modify the logic, the structure of the file, which means that we cannot implement fixes from the rules without reformatting the document. So this is something that you should be aware about. And now for the big reformatting, you shouldn't be so scared about it, because probably you are already formatting it using these rules. And I will show here an example of what kind of changes you might expect for reformatting. You'll see that the document start was added, that the indentation was standardized to 2 characters for the list, that this is a sequence, right? Task is a sequence. It was indented, which is the Ansible standard, because it's much easier to read. Another change is that you'll see that the comment has only one space instead of random number of spaces. And you also see that the message got the quotes removed, because the quotes are not needed in this case. And the entire idea is to attempt to normalize the document, make it as simple to read by the user as possible. And these changes are exactly the same kind of changes Prettier would do on a YAML document. So you shouldn't be afraid that a different formatter would produce a different outcome. Now, some notes for YAML-lint users, because YAML-lint was used in Ansible world for a very long period of time, including by us. The trick here is that ansible-lint is using YAML-lint internally. It is a dependency of YAML-lint. The only difference is that we have a slightly different set of defaults, and I included them here. There are not so many, but are important because they ensure that the formatting of the document it is the same everywhere. If you want, you can have a YAML-lint config file which is loaded by our tool and respected. So you can have your own set of settings. As you can, one thing that should also be mentioned is that if you use both ansible-lint and YAML-lint, probably you can drop YAML-lint because there is no reason for running it. It's already part of ansible-lint. Until recently, until version 6, it was an optional dependency. And some people used both, but now it's using both of them. And it will look for all YAML files in your repository, regardless if they are Ansible owned or not. Obviously, there are specific rules, and most of the rules are specific to Ansible files. But for the other ones, it only takes care of formatting, like YAML-lint. Okay, so how can you use ansible-lint? One very popular way, and it's our favorite one, is to use it as a pre-commit tool, hook. Now, keep in mind that I'm referring to the pre-commit tool, which is lint orchestrator, you can say, which can run lots of linters easily and very fast. It is also available as a hosted service, or you can just run it locally. It is not the same thing as installing a Git hook. Even if we use it locally, it will not install Git hooks by default. So you can run it as a simple tool from the command line. It's very fast. And as you can see, to enable ansible-lint in it is extremely easy because only few lines. It's like 4 lines of code to add on the root of your repository, and that's all you need for using ansible-lint as in pre-commit. Another easy way to use it is to run ansible-lint GitHub action, which is a community-supported GitHub action that runs the linter. Again, it is as easy as possible, just adding one file to your repository, and now when you have a pull request, it will run ansible-lint on the repository. Obviously, that if you already run pre-commit and have it integrated on GitHub, probably you don't need the action anymore because you run it as pre-commit. But if you are not interested about pre-commit, or you want to just run ansible-lint itself, use this one. This one has some extra benefits. Is that you will get annotations on GitHub at the specific place of the error or the warning. So it's much easier for reviewing the changes. Now, a little bit about execution environments, because these are new, especially for the community folks. And the execution environment is basically a container with Ansible in it. In our case, the DevTools team has a container called Creator EE, which contains also development tools and a cherry-picked set of Ansible community collections that are needed, like for Podman, for Docker, and stuff like this. So this is the easiest way to use ansible-lint inside the container, because we updated it on each ansible-lint release, and also when we get newer versions of Ansible. This execution environment is also used by the GitHub action, which makes it run very fast because it just runs a container instead of installing all the dependencies, by VS Code Ansible extension, and by Ansible Navigator. So a little bit about the Visual Studio Code Ansible integration is that by default, when you open a playbook, let's say in VS Code, when you have the extension installed, it will also run the linter, and you'll see the errors reported. The same stuff that you get on the command line when you run the linter, you'll see reported directly in code. very similar is the integration with Ansible Navigator, where you just run Ansible Navigator lint and the file name, and you'll get the errors, and you can look at them. You can even sort them if you need. So you can investigate and probably deal with the most important ones, or decide what you want to do. It's like, I want to ignore this one and fix this one, and things like this. Some other features that are planned for this year, and they will be released relatively soon, support for JSON schemas for validating all the YAML files related to Ansible. And you'll be surprised, but at this point, there are 11 of them. Like requirements, other meta files, runtime files, in addition to the normal ones. It means that it will be much more easier to avoid writing new rules, because we can only change the schemas for them. So many things that we checked for in the past can be implemented in JSON schema, which it's very convenient. Another new feature that we plan to add is scoring. Basically, we will print a score, likely something between 0 and 10, regarding how we think that the quality of the code looks for your content, for your repository. And this will count the number of warnings found by the linter, and consider how important they are. Obviously, that formatting is less important than something that is likely a real bug and something that is discouraged. But in the end, the score will be a number. So you could rate it, okay, I'm 10 out of 10, or I'm 8 out of 10, something like this. Something else that we will do for the linter, we will enable profiles, meaning that some people that do not want to follow all the rules and all the for the code, they will be able to run it with a different profile, which may be, let's say, a subset. For example, some of we will have a profile for AEP and for certification. Likely, this is going to be quite an extensive one. But for others, we will have like a minimal profile, which will only highlight the stuff that it's very important, considered to be fixed. This will allow people to pick their own poison. And obviously, we will have more rules. We have several pull requests even from the community for implementing new rules. So I would expect that by the end of the year, probably we'll have something like 10 more new rules for the linter. And I think that's mostly all I wanted to say today. It's like, be sure that you join Ansible DevTools channel on Matrix or IRC, depends on which one you prefer. Because we have lots of people there that are staying there all the time. And this is, let's say, the most interactive way to interact with others. Also, do not forget that all our projects do have GitHub discussions enabled. So if you are not so into live interaction with someone, you can go the offline mode and just post a question on one of the repositories. Also, you can try to contact me directly. Basically, yes, this is play with some of these tools, and I'm very keen to hear your questions.
Thank you very much, Sorin. So one question is, will the --write command line argument to ansible-lint, so will the write option change the existing short names of the modules into FQCN? So that's fully
It will. So
it will.
It will, but it doesn't at this moment. There is a pull request for it. So let let me see if I can go back. Jacob already has a code for it, but it's not merged yet because we had a lot of changes to do, and it will go in at some point in the near future, probably in less than a month or something like this. So at this moment, it's only doing reformatting. It's not fixing this, but it will in the future. Now, you need to be aware that you do not want to change too many things at one point. So probably the first thing you want, if needed, you want to do the rewrite for formatting. And after this, you want to enable the rule because you don't want to mix in the same change, adding fully qualified collection names and reformatting. It's really a bad practice, and I would discourage anyone from doing the same. It's like you need two different changes. One is formatting, because it's very easy to review and unlikely to introduce any bugs. And another one to fix a specific rule, right?
And what is the reason for doing two passes, one for structural and one?
It is in general a bad practice to combine unrelated changes in the same pull request when you make, because it is hard to review and easy to spot mistakes. Even if a mistake, it's like one character. It increases the size of the change a lot. Obviously, that if you have your home lab Ansible repository and you probably do not even have CI configured on it, you can do whatever you want. It's like you can rewrite it and save it. It's not a big deal. But I'm more referring to repositories where you have a team, right? Where you have CI. And in these cases, you just want to separate unrelated changes, even if you do it at like 10 minutes distance between them. But at least you have one change that is fixing the reformatting, another one that is fixing the fully qualified names, another one that is fixing, let's say, the booleans and stuff like this. So this is the main reason why I am advocating for keeping things separated. Now, if you already have everything all right in your code, you can use the right feature on pull request, because it will only modify the already the proposed change. It will not touch other code if the code is already compliant with all the rules, which is one of the reasons why you can use it as a pre-commit tool. Because pre-commit CI has the ability to fix your PR. So you can make a PR to a collection, let's say, and maybe you forgot to use the correct formatting on it. What you'll see when you have pre-commit CI enabled is you'll see another change made on top of yours that is fixing your problem. So you don't have to fix it yourself. It's fixed it automatically. And in the end, the pull request will be just fine. So this is a big benefit because it does remove some unpleasant human work, right? Changing reformatting to be consistent is not something that anyone finds any pleasure doing, right? We know it is good, but it's better to have a tool to do it for you.
That's great. And just to confirm, this rewriting will be available via the VS Code plugin as well as ansible-lint directly. Great. Cool.
It is already in the last version 6, so you can start playing with, and I will encourage anyone to report on it, test it, and if you see something that doesn't is not formatted correctly, file a bug for it, because it's we call it experimental because we didn't have time to check it in the wild enough, right? to build enough trust. So we are not 100% sure. There are no corner cases where formatting would do something that would be found ugly, right, by a human. We know for sure that it's not supposed to break any file, because we compare before and after and ensure that they are loaded the same way, the same structure of the document. So the worst thing that could happen is like you would have a comment that would be split or something like this, or moved one line up or down, but nothing else, I would say. And do not be aware that we keep the lines between the tasks. So if you have new lines to separate tasks to make it easier to read, we keep them.
Cool, that's great. And we will send out an email to everyone on the meetup list, whether they attended or not, with links to all of the discussions.
Yes, I'll share the document. It's a single HTML file.
That's great. Thank you very much again for your time, Sorin. I'm really excited by this stuff. I think it's really going to help people. Next up, we have Dennis. Dennis, hopefully you're ready. Sorin, if you could just stop screen sharing.
Yes.
That'd be brilliant. Thank you very much. Dennis, you are currently muted.
Oh, there we go. How's that?
Brilliant.
Brilliant. Lovely. Right, okay, let me just get my slides up. There we go. So hopefully you can see that now.
Yeah, maybe increase the text size a couple of notches in the editor might be good. I know YouTube sometimes downscales this on the video.
Is that better? I've just gone up one size. Is that all right, do you think?
Hopefully it'll take a little bit.
Okay. I can always make it bigger again. I'll do my presentation now.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll come back. Okay. Just need something else. Right. Yeah, so just a few slides to set the scene before we go into a bit of a code demo. So my name's Dennis McCarthy. I like automation, mainly Ansible as well as part of that. It's a big part of that. I've been using Ansible for just about 5 years. I founded my own meetup called the London Infrastructure as Code, and a YouTube channel which has got loads of Ansible how-tos on it, everything on there. I did used to work for Red Hat for a short period of time, but I'm a contractor, so I've kind of enjoyed that. But while I was at Red Hat, I did do lots of customer automation sort of journeys. And I take their scripts, manual processes, and then utilize Ansible to sort of drive that automation within their organization. And I learned quite a lot of different ways of doing it. You know, keeping it simple was a big thing, especially when you're handing over to people that may or may not necessarily be au fait with Ansible as well. Yeah, so it gives me a good understanding of what kind of works and what doesn't work with a client. You can come up with the best thing in the world, but if the client doesn't understand it, you're wasting your time, really. I did publish a book. Almost didn't put this on here, but I did publish a book called Automation with Puppet 5 a while ago. And then as I finished all that hard work, Puppet 6 came out. So it was a good experience to go through. I now work at WellPay, one of their sections of that particular organization that deals with most of the money, which is good. My role is 80% writing Ansible, updating new code or updating existing code or writing new code. And I think keep it simple. You know, I've been to lots of different places, and you look at what they've done to implement the solution. You just think that's slightly complicated. It just makes it difficult to hand over. It makes it difficult to document. And if you can try and keep it as simple as possible, I think that is really the key. You know, don't try and protect your job. You make more friends if you're friendly and actually help other people. I find in my particular career. So within the environment, so before I start, this what I've done doesn't specifically mean you have to sort of replace Puppet in a particular way. It's pretty much a good workflow to automate the processes that I'm automating. There's nothing wrong with Puppet. It's a good tool used by lots of people. We currently have a sort of hybrid Puppet Ansible model. We've got sort of legacy old Puppet that sort of sits there, I think version 5, and there's a new Puppet implementation as well. But the new implementation doesn't have any of our role configuration in it, which is where this work has come in. So Ansible does more and more at WorldPay, and probably every company. There's a lot of application teams and developers using Ansible to automate their work and their deployments, their configuration of their applications as well. So I'm developing the framework that's going to allow us to sort of fully migrate off of Puppet and onto Ansible. Puppet still currently configures our VMs in terms of the operating system, the CIS stuff for hardening, and also all the required agents. I have Ansible that does exactly the same stuff, but you just have to be careful with how you implement stuff. I don't want to break anything, so that process is sort of coming in slowly. Ansible takes over after the build and configures all of the role-specific configuration that we've got. So we've got about 40 application roles on around 2,000 servers spread over different environments, across sort of test, pre-production, and then production as well. Once you see the workflow with some code examples that I'll go through, you should hopefully see it has the sort of ability to scale, and it will eventually include operating system configuration, CIS, and also the agents. So a quick overview of Hyra, because Hyra is kind of like the brains behind Puppet. It's like this triangle, very specific at the top. If you want to change one thing on one node, you'll have a node file, and you'll set the setting there. If you want to apply something to every server and every system, then it will go in a global. So you can see this top-down specific to global sort of workflow. So the bits I'm interested in are the role in the environment, and as part of the environment, we also have a zone configuration. And where global is the catch-all, I've actually been through all of the roles that I'm going to be responsible for and identified anything that's common across that entire platform. Common users, common SSH keys, common directories, common NFS mounts, common cron users. There's a whole host of different things. So that goes into common, and that's the very first thing it does. So it's a bit of a reversal from global. Because I've got old Puppet, I get to look at it, and for the existing roles, I can then pull out everything and convert that into Ansible playbooks. So when we build new servers on new Puppet, we can then come in and run our Ansible and take over. For new roles that aren't in old Puppet, I get like a workbook, and then I work with the developer or the application team to actually give them what they need to be able to work. And then I can then build more servers for them if they need, or I can actually utilize a lot of that code and reuse it for other roles as well, so it sort of speeds up the whole development process. So this pretty much leads to the workflow that I've been using. So on the left-hand side, we have Puppet. That does the operating system, CIS rules and agents, and that's on one side, and that gets delivered to us. And then we are able to then run our Ansible code, and it's split up into these sections. So you have the common, which is, like I said before, everything that's common amongst every role. And then we have the role-specific configuration, which includes all the role-specific users and SSH keys and packages and file systems. And then we have all the environment, the environment-specific settings within the role. So you have your test, your production, so an NFS mount in production for a particular role, like a web server or a database server, isn't going to be the same as one that you're using in test or pre-prod. So we can cater for that as well. And then the zones there, it's not used as much, but it then gives you an extra functionality to allow you to split what happens between a different zone. So zone 1 and 2 can do different things, have different users. It's totally up to you what you want to put in there. And then outside of the role, we then run our environment setup. So this is anything for test, pre-prod, and production. You could put it into common, but it's quite nice to sort of have this, I guess, compartmentalize everything, so that when we need to add something new, you go, where do we need it? Do we need it in the role? Is it environment? Is it for test, dev, production? Is it something that's going to apply to everything? So then you can decide where you want it to go. And it's like everything has a logical kind of fit, which is quite good. It does keep it simple. Everything's managed by one variable file. So common has one variable file. The role, each specific role has one variable file. Everything is in it. So if you want to make a change, it's really easy just to come along and add a new file system, add a new user, add a new package, rerun it, and it picks up the new changes. There is some crossover. So new Puppet controls the operating system, CIS and agents. So that does come into conflict. Sometimes I need to give the roles access to a server, because they've got some particular AD accounts that people need to log in and do support work. And because the operating system is managed, access is managed as part of the operating system public modules, we need to add a tag that skips that particular module, just because we're now managing that with Ansible. And the same thing goes for things like CIS, SMX11, forwarding, stuff that we have to turn on for some Oracle servers, for example, and we can individually section out a particular CIS rule, and then obviously go and get our exceptions and stuff that allow us to do that when we move up the environments. So have a quick look at the code overview. So if you go onto GitHub and just look at my username DMCCUK, you'll see that there is here it is. Yeah, so you just look at my page, and then in the bottom right hand corner is the VM customization. So if you want to have a look now, feel free to go and have a look. And we have the same workflow and then a quick start guide. I'm still making a few updates to this. This only went live a few weeks ago. But if we have a look at the code, so I'm using Visual Studio Code, and that's how I'm going to show you the code, and that's what I'm going to run Ansible from in terms of the terminal. I'm using Ansible version 2.10.8. It's not the newest, but I'm just stuck with whatever's in the repo that I used to install Ansible, but it doesn't affect what I'm running. And some of the companies, whenever you work for companies, sometimes you're stuck with whatever they can implement, and sometimes it's not the newest version. I think at work I'm using like a 2.8 version because of what's available in the repo. Unfortunately, there's no separate pip server. I'm sort of stuck. So you just have to kind of unfortunately make it work. The latest and greatest isn't necessarily always available. But as you can see from the workflow and the deployment file here, so this is the entry point to running the role. We're only running a common role and an environment role. We're not doing anything else. Everything else happens within that role. We have a host file, so host.ini, which is just the inventory file, and I've got 2 servers. I didn't want to complicate it with too many servers with too much code. Might as well keep it fairly flat for now. These are the different roles. So these are the different servers we're going to use, and the entry point for the common role is the main.yaml. So if we...
Sorry, Dennis, could you increase the text size maybe another 2 notches? We just got some feedback there. It's a little difficult. Thank you.
Do you think, is that better? I don't know if anyone can just give a thumbs up in the chat. Probably go again. I'm sort of zooming in on it. Okay, I'll carry on. I've done it. If you need it again, I can do it again. So the entry point, once it runs the common role, is the main.yaml inside the common role. So if we come to roles and common, inside tasks, we have a main.yaml. And in here, this is like the brain. We reference our common variable file. We also set some facts. So if you look at the host.ini, you can see that my server names are quite well named. It tells me the data center. It tells me the environment, P or T. I get a zone, and I also have a role name and also a number of a server. And if you have a look here, you can see that when we set facts, we set the environment, the role, and the zone, and it's all based on the same sections. It's nice and simple. So you don't have to give it any more information. You can just run the VM customization deployment, and it will pick up these variables and take that with it as it runs. If you don't have very well-named servers and you're trying to do something similar, you can just use the extra variable section, and you can have env equals and role equals, and you can do it that way as well. It will work in exactly the same way. And then have a quick debug just to double check how each server is being picked up and discovered, and how the facts are being set. And then we run our common tasks. So there's not too much here. The common tasks hook in directly to the common variables, which is this file at the top. They all have one. We're just running users, a directory creation, and then a fixed repos, because the AWS CentOS 8 servers I'm using, their yum doesn't work properly. You have to disable something before it actually can install anything. So that's there just for this. But if we have a look in the common variables, you can see that we've just got directories. So that's the first one. These are commented out for later, just to show you can just add new directories quite easily. We've got some test dev and some prod information just for users to go onto that particular environment. And in the real world, I'm doing volume groups, logical volumes, file systems, NFS mounts, all of this stuff, SSH keys, the full directory structure with permissions and ownerships. So if we go back to the main.yaml of the common task, the next thing it does is just to register if the role exists. So if you're trying to run a role which is either web or DBA, or you've got a different role like app, and I've got an example for that, it will just ignore it. It runs common, and if it doesn't find this, it just won't run it. And then you get a little message at the end that says that the role directory doesn't exist and there's no customization has occurred, which is quite handy. So as long as the role exists, it then goes off and runs the role. So in our situation, we've got a DBA and a web role, and that would then drop into, say, the DBA here. And as you go to tasks and main, which is the entry point for the role, you can see again, we're picking up the role variable file, and then we're running a subset of tasks, which are users. There's some sudoers, packages, some particular directories. We're setting up ulimits, and then I've got a little test that runs to make sure that I think MariaDB's been installed properly out of the package list. Just to give an example of sort of testing as you go as well. That can be run separately at the end, depending on how you want to run it. And then once it runs those, it then drops down to this next level where it picks up the environment and the zone file. So you can see if you're looking at the contents of the tasks for the DBA role, you can see that we've got directories and limits and packages. And if we look in, so you see this loop section here, it's pretty much on everything because there's always normally more than one value that we're trying to change. If we pop into the DBA group variables, we can see that we've only got one package to install, which is MariaDB. We're setting up some specific directories with specific ownerships. There's two ways to do this. We've got test directories and production directories, and then we're setting up ulimits, and these are outside of like the TD and production roles, the production sections within the variables, just because I want these to apply to everything. And then we've got an extra sudoers update to make to allow that user to run certain commands like ipconfig, and then we set up a few kernel parameters, and then we have particular users as well for test dev and prod with their own information that you need to create a user. So if you wanted to add to this, you just create another directory, you create more ulimits, you add another sudoers update, you create a new kernel parameter, and when you run it, it will just pick up those new values, and it's all done from one place, which is quite neat. The next thing it does is once it's finished running all of those, so if we go to the DBA main.yaml, so it drops out of zone, and then it just goes back to the customization, and then it runs the environment role. An environment role is just another role, and this is anything that's environment specific. So if you look in tasks, you might want something to only run in test dev, and you can set that up here. I'm just creating a templates file that just adds a couple of all those things that we pick up, like the role, the environment, and the zone, all get added to this file, and it just gets put on every server in the temp directory. And that's pretty much an overview of how it sort of flows through, which links in to this picture here in terms of the workflow, how it moves through and how it goes through everything. So I've got some servers that I've set up. So we're going to run it on them and see what happens. So I don't have to do very much. There's not a lot really to do. You just have to update the host information. If you need extra variables, you can add them. But what this is going to do is it's going to run through. It's going to run on both the web server and the database server. It's going to apply the common. It's going to drop into the role, do the role specific stuff. And it's going to drop into any environment or zone specific stuff. And then it's going to hit the general environment role, and then it will finish. So let's see what happens. Can't make that any smaller. Pull this up. Okay, so fairly standard. I haven't run, although I've been testing, I haven't run anything on these servers. So it takes probably takes about 35 seconds or so. It's pretty quick. The longest section is just installing the different packages. Okay, so we've now dropped into the DBA section. So once this finishes, we'll just go back up to the top, have a quick scroll down to see everything's happened. And then I might just make a couple of quick changes in some of the variable files, and you can see that they get applied as well, which is quite handy. Okay, so that's finished running. I like using, in my Ansible configuration, I like using whitelist stuff. Is it whitelist? Yeah, the callback whitelist. And it gives you this output, which is a little bit more interesting. You get some times of how long things took. So you can see here that it took like 12 seconds to install the DBA MariaDB. So if we scroll back up to the top, go. So, gathers facts, all the usual stuff it does. This is where it basically outputs out what each server has based on the set facts. You can see we've got a test server and a production server. One's web, one's DBA, and we've got these different zone files. It tells you what it's going to run. So these are the things that we saw before, the users, directories, and the fixed repos. They get run. So the common users and groups get set up. We're still in the common area at the moment. So you can see here that we're still in the common area. So this is all of the common stuff is happening on both the web server and the DBA server. And then we finish with the common and we move into the web. So now it's just updating the web server. And as the web server, it's just in users, directories, and packages now. And it drops through, it installs those. And once that's set up, it then moves on to the DBA setup. Now the DBA's got a lot more playbooks to run, a lot more tasks, as you can see in blue, and then it runs all of those individual tasks against the server. And once it finishes, still on DBA, here we go. Now we've dropped out. We're in the environment sections. This is the very last role in deployment, and it just adds a couple of files, those environment files. And that's pretty much it for that bit of work. So you can pick some of this out. You can have a look at that environment file. And paste is going to let me. Yeah, so that environment file, we just created this temporary environment.txt file, which just gives us a breakdown of what it is that we've got on our server. You can use them in, custom facts later. And so to show you how quickly it is to update it, we're going to common variables and make some room. You see we've got a new requirement. We need to add some more directories common to apply to everything. And also in our host.ini, I'm going to add in this new server, which is an app server. I haven't written a role for app, so it doesn't exist. So what should happen is it should apply, must remember to save, Control S. Because it doesn't exist, it will run all the common role against it, and then it will give us a message saying it couldn't find a role, so it didn't do anything else. And let me just update this and save this as well. So we're going to add some directories. We're going to run on an extra server that we haven't run on in an app role. It's just in here, this server here. I mean, it is actually the same as this server. So it's going to do exactly the same stuff. And we can just, now that we've saved that, we just run it again. Don't have to do anything else. Room. Because we've never logged into this server before, we just have to give it a host key check. So that's now done. That's now running against this third app server. So it's going to run all the common stuff. It will run through everything else again. It'll be quite quick. So these are the new directories that we just added. They've now been created with the right permissions on both servers. And then it goes through a lot quicker once it's already run through once. You can see there's not a lot of yellow. There's not a lot of changes. It's all green because it's already done it before. And that's almost there. Okay, so if we scroll up, we can see here that this server app01, it says the role directory does not exist, so no role customization was performed. So you'd have to create a new one. In my environment, I actually have a skeleton. I have a skeleton Ansible playbook that creates all of this for me. So and it's getting to a point now where I can actually guess what directories are going to be needed, what access is going to be needed, what the sudo rules are, because I've seen so many of the other roles already. So I could get to a place where I could probably put 90% of all that in place just with the skeleton role creation. And as part of that, it also updates the variables as well. So it all kind of gets created in one, and you just run it against your server and you're 90% there. What else have I got here? Yeah, so we've done the demo. We've looked at the environment.txt file. Yeah, if you were to set standards, like you have a standard AD naming convention for admins and users to get on, you could definitely customize all this, standard file systems and standard places, standard users, etc. Makes it a lot easier. And the server convention, naming convention really helps as well. And just a quick note on idempotence, because I'm not actually managing OS or CIS or agent installs here, although I could, I don't. The idempotence doesn't matter so much. I don't need to keep running this role, 10 times a day or every half an hour, because once the customization has happened, it doesn't change much. It's one of those things that doesn't change very often. Once you've agreed it works, it rarely ever gets tweaked. It just sits there. So you don't need to worry about the idempotence for this particular bit of work. So that's my workflow to kind of migrate away from Puppet. I hope you can see it's not too much of a step to now bring in the OS and the CIS, the agents into the workflow, maybe either via common or as a separate operating system role that does all the definitions depending on the version and location, all that sort of stuff. It should scale relatively quickly with the addition of new roles. So if you have an application role or 10 other roles that you need to meet the particular requirements, it isn't particularly tricky to add that in or to customize it, and then control it all with one file. And that's easy to document. It's sort of self-documenting. It's easy to hand it over to someone. It won't take them very long if they've got any Ansible experience to pick up how that works and how they can actually use it. So it's not necessarily restricted to, replacing Puppet. It's just generally a workflow that allows you to sort of have a compartment for every, a place for everything to be, and an easier way to understand how it all kind of drops through and fits together. So I hope some of you found it useful. The GitHub page is, I'll put all the details in the slides afterwards. And if anyone's got any questions, I'll be happy to try my best to answer them.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Dennis. Really interesting. So we have one question.
Yep.
Which is, how could the web and DBA task be run in parallel? And follow up to that is, without needing to run those things manually, web and DBA seem to be orthogonal. I would like to be able to say Ansible playbook -i hosts playbook.yaml and have such selections which are independent of each other execute in parallel.
Sorry.
Yeah, there's a lot in there.
Yeah. So
basically, can the web and DBA tasks be run in parallel as they seem to be independent? Would that be a speed?
So at the moment they're running together, but they're not. They're only running the specific configuration for each one on. So DBA only gets DBA stuff, web stuff only gets web stuff. That's how it runs at the moment. They're not doubling up. Do you mean you just want to run web, or you just want to run DBA? I guess that is that.
Yeah, could you bring back the command line where the Ansible playbook command line where you invoked it?
Yeah, here you go. So it's just Ansible playbook, the host, and then VM customization.
And apologies to Linux Python on chat for me butchering their question. But Dennis is on Matrix, so maybe at the end of this he can do a lot better job than me.
Yeah, I can't see the.
Oh, sorry. This was a question generally towards Ansible rather than. So Ansible, I believe, has I think they're called strategies, which are different ways that you can run things. I will find some links for you and put them in. I don't see any other questions, but as we said, we'll share the links.
Thanks,
include the notes of the GitHub repo and bits. But yeah, thanks again, Dennis. Great to have you back.
Yeah, no worries.
James, are you around?
I am here, yes. Can you hear me? That's a good question.
And indeed, yes.
Fantastic. Okay, let me just get myself organized and I'll share my screen. Okay, Can I just check we can see a slide deck before I start?
I can see the slide deck in, I don't know what we call it, editor mode rather than full screen.
Okay, I have switched to full screen. Is it lag, do you think? Or
So, in fact, in Jitsi, you should be able to see what I can see.
okay, hold on. I'm only on one screen here, which is
okay.
my bad. Okay, I have an idea of what might have caused it. Bear with. So,
As in, the only program I can see is PowerPoint, but I can see like the full list of slides in the left-hand thumb bar, left-hand scroll bar.
okay, I think if I go entire screen, which is looping terribly, but if I now get to PowerPoint and do that, does that look better? He says, hopefully.
That seems to be exactly the same.
How peculiar. Okay, I'm thinking this doesn't like Firefox on a Mac, maybe.
Maybe. I mean, it's clear enough to read, and we'll share links to the PDF slides afterwards. So I think we should be good.
Okay, great. I'll crack on as we are then. I've turned off notifications on my computer, so there shouldn't be anything incriminating coming through. So, apologies for the technical problems. It's been a day for them. Thank you, everyone, for coming along today. Thank you, John, for having me back at the London Ansible meetup. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm not going to read the title off the slide. It's far too long. One of the things I've really struggled with this presentation is actually coming up with a concise title. So votes, answers on a postcard at the end if you feel so inclined. Now, very briefly, who am I? Because you didn't come here to learn about me. You came to learn about Ansible. Currently a technical account manager at AWS. I also do a myriad of other things in my spare time, including I write books on Ansible. So I've had 4 published to date. I got asked to do a 5th last week, but I had to say no because I just can't fit it into my diary right now. Anyway, that's me. So, a play on the title. Let me tell you a story. Why the long title? This presentation is based on one that I did for the Open Source Summit in Japan during COVID. And it was the first time I got accepted to speak at a conference in Japan. And I couldn't go into Japan because of COVID rules. So there is Murphy's Law in action. Anyway, all of this came about because before I joined AWS this year, I worked for a company that was largely based around computer networks. And it was at the core of what they did. I was working as an open source specialist and a consultant and an architect and wearing multiple hats as you do when you work for a small company. And the CEO gets in touch one day and he says, build me OpenStack. Now, I've deployed things like DevStack before. I've done the all-in-one node with Red Hat's build of OpenStack. Those are great if you want to learn the technology, if you want to see the GUI. They're not so good if you want to know how it actually works under the hood and how it all kind of fits together. Particularly, think back to, I'm working at this point for a networking company, so I have to know how the network hangs together and how the whole stack is going to survive, let's say, if a switch dies, if someone pulls a plug on something, that kind of thing. And again, back to the limitations of being a small company, I was told, here's a blade, you can build it on. Oh, it has mechanical storage. Now that is something I'm going to say to everyone on here, don't even go there, don't even attempt it. I've done the work for you to say, just don't. I'll give some details later in the presentation about what I did build it on in the end. But the whole goal of this was basically to produce this thing that, if you want a fancy name for it, it's called digital twinning. And NASA, according to the law of the internet, were the first people to actually use this. They produce digital twins by building full-scale mock-ups of space capsules, and so that paved the way for the more modern digital simulations that we know today. But it's a term that my understanding is can be used in any context. And so what I set about doing was I wanted to build an OpenStack environment that was going to be somewhat representative of something you would deploy in the real world. So think here, redundant switching, redundant networks, a separate management network, or at least VLAN, data transfer VLANs, those kind of things. So that's a pretty big ask, particularly when someone says to you, you've only got one machine to build it on. And certainly, if you know anything about OpenStack, I've got a slide later that shows you the architecture if you don't, so don't worry about it if you don't. But you would need, well, let's cut to the chase. My setup ended up with, I think, 10 servers and 5 switches in it. And nobody was going to give me that many U in a rack or that much kit to play with, even if it was old second-hand kit. So I had to build something that I could build a model of, which is where we come to digital twinning. So now, obviously, I wanted to use Ansible in this. That was kind of a given. I've written books on Ansible. I wasn't going to do this by hand. And I had a little play around with the OpenStack Ansible project at this time. I'd learned 2 things. One is that it's a really great project. It works really well. It takes care of a lot of the complexities of deploying OpenStack at scale across multiple nodes. I also learned that the playbooks are quite complex, and there are certain technologies within this that I just didn't understand from the word go. So Ceph, for example, I'd never touched Ceph storage before, but that seems to be the go-to that people are using. So I was going to have to do that, and getting the configuration right for that out of the box proved, at least for me, to be a challenge. So the whole hypothesis of this was I'm going to need something that not only I can build in an automated manner, because ultimately one day, hopefully, we're going to build this in a data center for real for a customer, but also I want to be able to rip it up and rebuild it as fast as I can. I don't want to be spending hours in doing the basics. Now, you'll notice the title of this slide I have with Ansible and cloud-init. Now, this is not a cloud-init meetup. I'm well aware of that. The whole reason for bringing cloud-init into this equation was Ansible is great when you have a machine that it can talk to. I know Ansible can send raw commands as well, but if you have a machine that's come up and it has no IP address, I'm thinking here the very, very basics of system bring up, then there's not a lot that Ansible can do with it at that point. And so cloud-init, to me, became something that if you're working with bare metal, with VM images that are unconfigured, such as the cloud images that you can download for OpenStack and other hypervisor platforms, then you want to be using cloud-init as part of your automation solution with Ansible, because cloud-init you can describe in YAML, which we know and love, and say this machine should come up with this IP address and this default password. And the great thing is cloud-init, you can specify user data in it, which says run this command or set of bash commands on boot. So that was great, because what I could do was I could build machines where cloud-init would bring the machine up, configure all the basics for me, and then clone my Ansible playbooks from GitHub, because obviously the machines at this point had network connectivity, and run the playbook. So they actually, to me, although I didn't know it before I started down this road, they make a great pair and they go together really, really well. So I don't think I need to explain this one, but why Ansible? Let's just whiz through this quickly for anyone who is new to the topic of Ansible, who's come along here tonight, for example, and just to state the case for Ansible, because I think that's always important to refresh our memory on this. So obviously, complete disclosure, my top bullet, yeah, familiarity. I know Ansible. If I'd had to learn Chef or Puppet, then that would have added time to the project. But all the other reasons that we love Ansible for, it's agentless. I've already deployed 2 technologies in this environment. I've chosen cloud-init and Ansible. I don't want to start to get cloud-init to deploy an agent that I then have to configure to connect back to. Do you see the dilemma here. I don't want to end up with that sort of drama. And so Ansible being agentless is fantastic. The other benefit in this environment is it works really well with switches as well. It works really well with network hardware. And remember, my original goal was to build something that was representative of a complete deployment. So think amongst this, switch configuration has to be part of this. You can't just configure the nodes and then hope for the best. The other great things about Ansible, I've come across some disagreement with this term, but I'm going to stick with it, idempotent. So it makes changes only if changes are needed. So it's very efficient. And again, when you're building an environment that you are tinkering with, playing with, and you think you might have to rip it up or you might break something and you need to redeploy your original configuration, that's really important because you can just run a playbook over the top of something that you've broken and it puts everything back how it was, at least the configuration files you've touched, obviously. The code I find is self-documenting. I find it very easy to read, and we're deploying an infrastructure with this. So Ansible Vault is an absolutely vital component of this for me, because Ansible Vault, you're deploying an infrastructure that's got, if not root passwords, certainly user passwords that have sudo access. You've got secrets that are being built into the OpenStack Ansible configuration. There is just really important data that you don't want lying around unencrypted at rest. So Ansible Vault takes care of that seamlessly. You can just integrate your variable data, seamlessly into your playbooks. Now, why cloud-init? I've kind of covered this, so I won't spend too much time on this, but when I show you how I've actually built this, it'll start to make a bit more sense. As I say, the motivation for using cloud-init is it's that layer that brings things up from their base configuration. So one of the things that I'd noticed, the reason I got the idea for cloud-init was, other than my little dabbling with OpenStack previously, was if you download any of the modern Ubuntu server distributions, you see that cloud-init is already baked in, even though they are not ephemeral images. They're not images that run on storage that's going to go away. So that caught my eye. That was like, okay, I need to investigate this. I want to have a look at this and see if it will serve. And it became really valuable, because the other thing about Ansible is that although it is agentless, it does expect the existence of a viable Python environment on the nodes that it's managing. And some of the really minimal cloud images that you get don't have Python on them because they've been shrunk down so much, they've taken Python out. So the great thing about cloud-init is that you can use it. You basically build a little ISO image. It's a few megabytes in size. You attach that to your machine or your VM, or if you were building on bare metal, I'm sure that it could be a USB drive. And that then tells the machine, this is how you're going to come up, this is your IP, this is your password, and then go away and install Python, do anything else that is needed to get a viable Ansible environment up and running. So with all that, the requirements gathering phase done, I had been given one blade. As I say, I didn't end up using that blade because of the storage IOPS, I suppose it would come down to, really. That was the biggest problem. It's not about data transfer rates, it's about number of IO operations per second. Given that hardware was limited, it was clear that I was going to need a hypervisor, something that I wanted to be fast, free, flexible, and OpenStack is itself a hypervisor. It's one of its functions in life is to run VMs. So whatever I used had to support nested virtualization. Now, most modern server-grade CPUs support it. It was present in my case. So Linux KVM seemed like the obvious choice there. And there are native modules for that as well if you want to automate that with Ansible. But what about the switch layer? Now, switching is something every business has their own solution for. Most are locked in with a particular vendor or perhaps set of vendors, and they tend to have, as part of their value add, management layers that go over the top of them. Now, what I wanted was something that I could virtualize, first of all, because remember my hardware limitation that I've got going on here. It needed to run on KVM, and I needed it to be free. I don't have a Cisco developer license. I didn't want to get into downloading dodgy ROMs off the internet or anything like that. I wanted something that I could use for free to build something. And there is a network vendor who were known as Cumulus Networks. They were acquired by NVIDIA 2-3 years ago now. Time has flown. But the great thing about their switches is they have built an open standards-based, Linux-based switching platform that runs on whitebox hardware. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't run on low-end hardware. I think the cheapest devices that I've found it runs on are about £5,000-6,000. But the great thing is, because it's built on top of Linux, they give you a KVM compatible image you can download, you can run it for free, and it gives you access to all the modern web scale networking technologies that you would expect to find in a switch. And you can run it in any environment you like. Obviously, you're not going to achieve wire speed, but that wasn't the name of the game here. The name of the game was very much, I wanted to just be able to play with bonding, play with network setup, play with VLANs, do things that normally you would require an entire rack for, thousands, tens of thousands of pounds worth of equipment and an awful lot of wiring and time spent wiring. So this presentation, this was also taken, just for trivia's sake, from a blog article that Cumulus Networks published on their website. Unfortunately, NVIDIA have sort of sanitized the whole Cumulus Networks site and integrated it, and clearly my blog article didn't quite agree with their standardization, so it's not up anymore, sadly. But my little claim to fame is that once I had a blog article published on a network manufacturer's website. Now, moving on to the actual deployment, so we can actually get to the bit where I used Ansible. So, all of this, as you can tell, just from the background so far, is technical stuff. This is highly complex. There's a lot of moving parts. My setup, I ended up with 10 Linux nodes and 5 switches. So that's hypervisor nodes, redundant storage nodes, a management node, database cluster, redundant database cluster. So incredible amount of complexity, and using 2 different physical networks, which is part of the reference design that you can download from the OpenStack Ansible project. It uses VLAN tags, it uses VXLAN for tunnel network. If you don't know these networking terms, don't worry about them. The point that I'm trying to convey with this slide is it was all incredibly complex. Some of these technologies I didn't know, and libvirt is a fantastic, fast, free hypervisor, but everything that you do with it is described basically in XML. So in my head, it was like, how on earth am I going to get my head around building this in XML? And particularly if something goes wrong, debugging it, getting to the bottom of it. So, open source world, we tend to favor things that don't have GUIs, and everything's command line. Ansible is in itself a command line tool until you bring in products like Tower. But I'd had a little dabble with GNS3 before, and doing a little bit of poking about behind the scenes, it turns out that GNS3 is, amongst other things, a wrapper for the KVM hypervisor. It even uses standard Linux commands under the hood. It uses standard image formats. But the great thing is it has a GUI. So actually, you can build your environment and you can understand what you're building by just looking at it. So the moment we've all been waiting for, this was my architecture for Ansible. So you can see there, unfortunately, the GUI for GNS3 doesn't do orthogonal lines, but what it does do is it produces a map. So you can see there every single node, you can power cycle them all individually. Each link that's there, you can right click on, and you can actually run up a local instance of Wireshark and sniff the traffic on it. So if you want to explore protocols like VXLAN, you can dig into them very easily. We've got here a switching mesh in the middle. So you've got leaf and spine switching architecture, which again, I am no authority on. It was a reference design that I downloaded from the Cumulus Networks website at the time. But it was all very valuable in getting me up to speed, building something. And the key point behind all of this is there's no way I would have attempted to build this without something like an Ansible toolchain. It just, if you can imagine having to go through each of these nodes by hand and running the configuration up, deploying files, deploying configuration files, installing things, it would have been absolutely brain busting, to coin a phrase. So Ansible was really something that saved the day for me here. Now, I'm not going to demo this because time this evening, and because the OpenStack Ansible project, their playbooks by themselves, they certainly running in a nested environment, they would take a full afternoon to run to deploy the platform on my hardware. So that's not to say we shouldn't attempt it, but this is why this is very much a presentation, not a demo. At the end of this, you will find some links. All the code that was used to produce this is on my GitHub page. I'll give you the links at the end of this, and John's sending out a PDF of the slides, as he says. So, but the great thing is, this worked. An awful lot of tweaking, an awful lot of back to the drawing board, an awful lot of vindication for the use of Ansible and cloud-init, because I was able to rip the architecture up every time I got it wrong, tweak the playbooks, and just redeploy at basically the push of a button. And knowing that the playbooks would take all afternoon to run, it didn't matter, because I could push the button, I could walk away confidently knowing that Ansible was doing all the work for me. And then I could come back, evaluate the end result, and find out whether I needed to do more debugging or whether I had a working environment. So, why is this relevant? Why have I brought this to the London Ansible meetup? The great thing about this is the Ansible playbooks that we use to build this, and indeed the cloud-init data, if you wanted to go the cloud-init route, you could reuse them in a real-world environment. Let's say that I had stayed on at this prior company and the CEO has said, I love the demo, let's now build it for real. The same playbooks that we used to build the digital twin would have worked on real hardware. Just you would have needed to change, obviously, the IP addressing and network port numbers, basically change things to match the hardware changes. But other than that, the exact same Ansible code that was used to build this on a hypervisor could build the real thing on bare metal. And I think that that's hugely powerful. And I think if it can build something that is as complex as a highly redundant OpenStack cluster, then that there's a lot that you can do with it. You know, there's a lot of deployments, microservices, architecture, that kind of thing that could be deployed this way and evaluated. And then you've got the visual appeal of GNS3 as well. So it's great as a training tool. It's great as something where you can actually sort of get your head around what's going on. And finally, before we move off this point, the GNS3 network is completely isolated. So you can run protocols on there. You can run your own DNS domain. You can run DHCP servers, broadcasts, multicasts, whatever you want. And you can do really nasty, dangerous things to the environment, and you won't affect your real production network. So again, in a test, in a security training environment, that is massively important. So what else can we do? I've already mentioned tearing the whole thing down to facilitate building it, and my sort of, dare I say it, trial and error approach to building. I'd like to say it wasn't quite as crude as that, but there was some iterative, okay, that didn't work, let's tweak that and try again. Things you can do, however, if you picture the slide, if you can envisage that mesh of wiring that I showed a few slides back, you could delete one of those network links to simulate a link failure, to simulate someone tripping over a wire and pulling a plug. You could power down an entire switch. You could power down an entire node. Because the whole network architecture is isolated, you could launch all manner of attack tools within this environment, knowing that it's safe, it's isolated, it's not going to get out into the real world. You could test backup and recovery processes. You could do nasty things to your QCOW image files, inject bytes where there shouldn't be bytes and things like that to simulate data corruption and bit rot. And I'm sure that there is a whole load of stuff not on this list that I haven't even thought of. But the more I played with this idea in my head, the more it struck me that Ansible is a really powerful tool for building these, not just individual deployments, but entire architectures, entire environments, which can then lend themselves to ultimately things like business continuity planning. And that's got to be a hugely compelling argument for automation with Ansible. So I've kind of done this to death. I'm not going to read the bullets on this slide. The only thing really here to highlight is that if you do choose to go down the GNS3 route, GNS3 supports snapshots like most modern hypervisors do. So you haven't actually got to redeploy every single time. You can if you want to, because obviously everything has been automated with Ansible. But if you want a single click approach, a faster approach, shall we say, GNS3 can snapshot the entire environment. So that's every single running VM and switch in one go. So a simple example, just won't labor the point because I want to leave some time for questions and chat and everything like that at the end of it. But just to say, the Ceph cluster in this, we had 3 OSD nodes. So in simple parlance, as I understand Ceph, God, I've got automation on the brain. As I understand Ceph and its data architecture, the OSD nodes are basically where the data is kept. So if you lose a node, then that's like having let's say, a 3-disk RAID 5 array and one of your disks dies. It's the same as that analogy. So the whole idea is, because we have a redundant storage architecture, we should be able to have an entire node blow up. And does the cluster keep running? Because obviously all the VMs that run on OpenStack are using the Ceph cluster for their data storage. So if the Ceph cluster ever fails, the OpenStack setup is basically dead in the water. So some things we could try: you can just power the node down cleanly. Do that, it still keeps working. That's great. You can test then your Ceph recovery processes. You can do things like, this was my data corruption method, DD to copy from dev random into the QCOW file image. So really nasty, evil stuff that would never happen in the real world. But I couldn't think at the time of another way to be really nasty to the data on the disk and to simulate a sort of mass corruption bit rot style event. I suppose also one might think of that as a ransomware, a data encryption event as well. Effectively, your disk becomes unreadable for reasons that you don't understand. So again, that puts you in a position where, okay, we've defined our backup process, we've defined our recovery point, our recovery time objectives. Can we now replay our backups? Can we restore them and get the cluster back to life? And you can test all of this again in a safe, isolated environment that Ansible built without having to worry about corrupting your customer, your production data. So let's talk about some of the other bits that probably didn't work so well, or that are certainly limitations I've identified of this. You know, this is something, building models of entire architectures like this, I think this is really exciting. And a legitimate response to that is, what else do you do for fun? But moving on from that, why would you want to do this? We've established that. What are the limitations? Obviously, this is a big positive step forward, but things to be aware of. It's not fast. You're not going to get wire rate performance on those virtualized switches. You're not going to get a great turn of speed out of your nested hypervisors. You've got basically 2 layers of nesting by the time you run VMs up on the virtual OpenStack instance, assuming that's what you choose to twin, obviously. And it's not going to be fast. So this is not something, this is very much limited to functional testing rather than any kind of performance testing. There's no specific hardware testing in this, although I was very keen to produce something that we could build into a real-world bare metal environment. if you want to learn the specifics of, I don't know, if you were a Dell house and you had iDRAC controllers, for example, which again Ansible integrates with, there's no virtualized iDRAC solution that I know of. There's no sort of fiber channel emulation in GNS3. So there are certain things that you can't do that would happen in real hardware. So this is a twin to the extent that the hypervisor, the emulation technologies that we have today enable us to do it. And the other thing is, certainly speaking in terms of trying this out with OpenStack Ansible, you're not going to do this on your laptop or even your average desktop rig. So things I learned from this experience, one was I ended up purchasing a second-hand, a refurbished workstation to run this on, because I just found that I needed to throw RAM at it, I needed to throw CPU cores at it, and don't ever try this on a mechanical disk. I put an SSD in. Now, it wasn't an NVMe one. What's now old-fashioned SATA one was perfectly adequate, but you do need hardware to throw at this. Now, again, if you were building a simpler architecture, that wouldn't be such an issue. Where you're using KVM as a hypervisor, do use VirtIO for disks and networking, because the power virtualization that uses is a huge order of magnitude faster than the emulated SATA, SCSI, E1000 type adapters that are also built into it. They are significantly slower, more than you would think. And GNS3 is a great multi-platform open source tool. It runs on Windows. I actually tried this on Windows first, simply because the most powerful PC that I had at my hands at that time was my gaming machine, and that unsurprisingly runs Windows. And yeah, just don't, basically, is the message. Just build yourself a Linux rig if you don't have one and do it with that. But I think I've saved the best bullet point on this for last. The Linux community, everyone who works in this OpenStack, Ansible space, just open source Linux in general, have been absolutely amazing. There were so many times when I got stuck with this project, and obviously now we have Matrix that John's shown us tonight, but at the time we were still using IRC. And it was amazing how many times I got absolutely floored by something that I just didn't understand. I would reach out into the community for help. And obviously, everybody's working on a voluntary basis. Sometimes it would take half a day or a day for someone to get back to me. But everyone always got back to me. They fixed my issues. They revealed, in some cases, bugs that were ongoing and needed to be fixed. And I just think one of the things was, I've been working in open source for a decade, probably more now, but doing this was a great reminder as to why something like the Ansible project and all the community that goes with this is such a powerful and a positive thing for what we do in IT. So, moving this forwards, obviously I've had a change of role this year. Things are a little bit different now, but back when in my previous role, once I got this technology, this way of digital twinning established, I built all my demo environments, all my customer proof of concept environments on this. So ways of doing things, configurations became more streamlined, and I'm using it as a tool. I would still use it as a tool to learn new technologies, at least where it's viable to do so. Obviously, you're not going to simulate the public cloud on this, but for using anything that you would self-host, this is absolutely amazing. And really, this was just something that I wanted to share this journey and this experience, because for me, it's been really powerful. It's been a really great lesson, I think, in how amazing Ansible and the open source community is, not just to do small automation tasks or deployments, because they're all valuable, but that actually you can scale it up to entire infrastructures. And that was something that, in spite of the roles I've done, I'd never had the time or the opportunities with the customers I worked with to do before. So that's it from me. Thank you for listening to me ramble this evening. If there's any questions, please let me know. And all my contact details are on the final slide as well. So if anyone does think of anything after the event or wants to take me up on any of this afterwards, just reach out. It's not a problem.
Thank you very much, James. Lots of great details in there. I haven't seen any questions. They did have one comment that running OpenStack Ansible to bring up a basic OpenStack set of machines runs for them in under an hour. Which it sounded like you were talking at best part of a half a day to a day. So maybe we can hook you two up and see if there's something there. Sorry, Karen.
No, it's fine. I'm always open to learning things. I'm sure that this isn't the be all and end all of solutions.
Yeah. And just one bit of clarification for anyone watching the YouTube stream later. The matrix channels are bridged to the existing IRC channels on Libra.chat. So we are one big happy community, irrespective of where you're connecting in from. I haven't seen any of the general questions come in, so I can see someone's typing. So yeah, once again, I'd like to thank Sorin, Dennis, and James for their presentations today, and to Shaps for help being organised and tag questions and do a load of background stuff. I put a poll in chat earlier to see if people are interested in doing the meetup in person. Seems like there's a genuine appetite for that, so we will try and get something happening there soon, and we'll pick a date for the next virtual one, hopefully not straight after a bank holiday this time. So I know that will cause some problems for some people, but it's good to get everyone back together, so thank you very much. One question for you, James. So what were the books that you authored that you mentioned?
Okay, I normally put them in the slide deck, but I thought that was possibly getting a little bit tired. Maybe that's just me. Okay, so books I've authored: Mastering Ansible, the 3rd and then the 4th edition, which is out recently. Hands-on Automation on Linux, which doesn't have Ansible in the title, but is mostly Ansible in it. And Practical Ansible 2.
That's great. Thank you very much. And thanks, Ian, for that question. I'm not seeing anything else. So, yeah, thank you very much for your time, everyone. It's been great. I'll send an email out to everyone on the meetup group with links to the video and the slides and bits once they're loaded. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.